Hello everyone, my name is Kitetsu and welcome back to my channel. So apologies for the fact this video has taken a while to come out because basically it was quite complex and it's taken me most of the weekend to, well, between being busy of course and just life happening, all of my free time at the weekend was spent kind of trying to get my head around this comparison video. So Kurnoth Hunters don't really need much introduction to anyone who is a fan of the Sylvaneth. They're these monstrously huge trees that kind of serve the elite powerhouse role in the Sylvaneth army. Basically for this video I want to compare them to the Sisters of the Watch units from the Wanderer's army, because obviously now the Kurnoth Hunters have had their rather big 40-point increase to their points costs. They are the same cost as these Sisters of the Watch, and I want to kind of evaluate whether they're still worth taking in your army and, you know, answer the question of whether you should substitute your hunters for the Sisters of the Watch. And I guess it may seem like a fairly random comparison, but I guess it's more the fact that here you have two elite archer units and they cost the exact same amount of points, and with the allegiance abilities being the way they are, it's going to be quite feasible to think that some people are going to be wondering which one of these is better and which one, if either, they should include in their army as their ranged option. So basically, I know I've promised that I kind of try and stay away from maths as much as possible, but I think to really understand a unit like the Kurnoth Hunter, and I guess the Sisters of the Watch as well, you kind of have to bring maths into it just to a very basic level. And I'm not a fantastic mathematician by any means, so I hope I've done these calculations correctly, and you know, I've gone over them a couple of times so they should be right, but there's aspects of the maths that I'm not really capable of calculating, or I haven't got the inclination to go away and find out how to do it. So I guess like the things that I'm not including into the maths are really like some of my strong discussion points. And you know, when it comes to the inherent worth of a unit, there are some things that maths cannot tell you. And again, these are the things we're going to sort of discuss, and whether these uncalculatable differences are worth it to you will depend completely on you. So, you know, for me, things that push the Kurnoth Hunters up may be less important to you. But anyway, let's have a real quick look at the Kurnoth Hunters war scroll. And obviously I'm going to be focusing here on the great bows. You know, I'm planning on doing a completely separate video focusing on the melee weapons, but for now I'm purely looking at a ranged unit versus another ranged unit. So basically the first thing that leaps out at you is they have this insane 30-inch range, which is literally bordering on it. Well, it is literally artillery kind of levels of range, so that in itself is brilliant. They make 2 attacks, they hit on 4s, wound on 3s, they have a nice -1 rend and a really cool D3 damage. Now the hit ratio is a bit of a drawback here, and to be honest, when I first started doing these calculations I thought, well, oh, they're actually not that great on paper, but then when you start to really think about it and start to appreciate the limits of what the maths tells you, you start to realise actually no, these units are still very, very good, and they are totally worth considering still in your Sylvaneth army. You know, you have to compare them to what else is out there, and then you start to realise, you know, they're still very, very good, and if anything, I would say it's probably more that they now cost what they're worth, rather than the fact they cost too much. So what else do we have? We have a 5-inch move, we've got 5 wounds, which by the time you're taking a unit of 3, that's 15 wounds, which is very, very good. They obviously have this ability here, which is the Tanglethorn Thicket, which basically means if you sacrifice some movement, you can re-roll failed save rolls. So seeing as they've already got a 4-up save, like standard, and if they don't move, which as archers you want to keep them back, probably protecting a captured objective, maybe on your side of the field, you're not going to be moving them, and they basically have a 4-up re-rolling save, which is great. And being Sylvaneth, you're probably going to very easily be able to put them in a Wildwood, which makes them a 3-up re-rolling, cast a Mystic Shield on them, and I guess that's a 2-up re-rolling. So for 15 wounds with a potential 2 or 3-up re-rolling save, they're brilliant. Their durability is incredible. Obviously the Huntsmaster down here, it says he adds 1 to the hit rolls, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. They also have this Trample Underfoot ability, which means they can basically deal out mortal wounds in combat. So obviously they're a ranged unit, they've got excessive range, but if someone does close in on them, they don't have to worry too much because of this incredible durability and the fact obviously their Quiverlings can attack, they can shoot whilst they're still in combat, and they can trample to deal mortal wounds. So it's not like they're helpless the second they've been charged. Add on top of that the fact they're probably in a Wildwood, and anything trying to charge at them through the Wildwood is putting themselves at great risk. You've got yourself a very protected unit. We also have this Envoys of the Everqueen ability, and it's really cool, but to be honest, when looking through all of the Sylvaneth War Scrolls, you realise that it's really only the Ancient that has a command ability that benefits from this, and I think the Ancient and Alariel are the only 2 War Scrolls in their entire list that actually have a command ability, but Alariel basically just affects every single unit no matter what, so that doesn't really help in this case. But nevertheless, if you take these guys with a Tree Lord Ancient as your general, which if you're going for a really competitive list I would thoroughly recommend you consider, then there's some great synergy here, because these guys are almost like amplifying beacons for those command abilities, and they extend the range of your command ability. First of all, these things will always be in range of the command ability, but they also extend that range by 8 inches. So that's another very cool ability. You know, with a bit of luck, you can probably put the vast majority of the units in your army re-rolling save rolls of 1, which is no small thing. The hit ratio, we'll go into a little bit more detail in a second, but what was putting me off at first is they only make 2 shots with their bow, and they have a 4+ chance of hitting. Now, a 4+ on a dice is basically a 4, 5 or 6, which means you'll miss on a 1, 2 or 3, which is a 50-50 chance of hitting, which means half of the normal hunters, not the Huntsmasters, half of the normal Kurnoth Hunters shots are actually going to miss, on average of course, which means you're really looking at 1 attack, and you know, you may wound, you may not. If you do, you've then got yourself limited to D3 damage. So there is a bit of a stumbling block there, but to be honest, once you actually start doing a bit of calculation on this, you find out it's not as bad as it seems. Let's quickly look at the Sisters of the Watch. Now, at first I was thinking this unit is absolutely insane, and in many ways it still is. If you can use these effectively and find a way to implement them to their optimal use in a game, they're going to be incredible. They don't have the best save, nor do they have many wounds. If you take a unit of 10, you're basically looking at 10 wounds versus the 15 of 3 Kurnoth Hunters. Their range is only 18 inches. They only fire once, normally, but they hit on 3s and wound on 3s. No rend, and 1 damage. What makes this unit incredible is that if you are fighting against Chaos, you add 1 to the wound roll, which means they're hitting on 3s and wounding on 2s. And then on top of that, via their Quicksilver Shot ability, they actually attack twice if they didn't move, and the High Sister makes 2 attacks. So you're looking at 22 shots, hitting on 3s and wounding on 2s. And of course, if they get charged, they make a bonus shot as well. So these women are dangerous, to put it mildly. And even though you don't have the rend, once you start doing the calculations, which this slide here is all about, and don't freak out just yet, we'll break down what some of this means. Even without that rend, they are putting out a potentially very large amount of damage and wounds. So basically everything mathematical I've done really for these 2 units is on this slide here. Starting with the Kurnoth Hunters, the 3 of them, what I've basically done is calculated that on average you're going to make about 3 hits. 3.3 to be precise, but we'll just say 3 hits. That's 2 of them hitting with a 50% chance of hitting or missing, and 1 of them is hitting on 3, so that pushes you up by the 0.3. If you are attacking a unit, and this is why I've color coded this here, with no save, then you basically multiply your hit chance by your wound chance, times that number by D3, which, and if you don't know, a D3 on average will cause 2 wounds because it's like the middle value. There is a formula for working that out if you want to go and Google it. It's quite simple, but basically you're looking at 4.4 damage on average. If you are firing at a unit with a 6+ save, obviously you're going to remove that because you have -1 rend. So you're going to be looking at exactly the same amount of wounds and damage. A 5+ save becomes a 6+ due to the rend, and you end up with 3.8, and so on and so forth, down to a 2+ save where you're maybe doing 1.5 damage. I then did the exact same calculations on the Sisters of the Watch, and I've given them 2 boxes because the first one is where they haven't moved against chaos here, non-chaos in brackets, and the second box is where they have moved non-chaos targets here and chaos here. And what you immediately see is 3.3 hits versus 14.6. So round these numbers up and you've got 3 hits versus 15, which is a rather large difference. Look at a unit with no saves and you are potentially doing 12 wounds. That's crazy. You know, fire against a unit of 10 models with no saves and you can just wipe the unit off the table just like that, gone. And that's the same if they've got a 6+ save. And what you see is even with the rend of the hunters and the fact that the sisters don't have the rend, in every single category they are doing more wounds basically. 3 times the amount. That's double, more or less double, and not too far off. So, you know, this is pretty huge, and even if you're looking at non-chaos targets, you're still doing more damage in every case here, quite significantly. So immediately you think, right, the difference is huge. These Sisters of the Watch are clearly better. But as with my Dryads versus Eternal Guard comparison, that is not the whole story. Otherwise we wouldn't really be making a whole video on this. But if they've moved, you literally more or less halve these numbers because they're only shooting once, which means the whole unit of 10 is making 11 shots rather than the 22. And when you compare the hunters to Sisters of the Watch that have moved and are non-chaos targets, you actually see that these numbers are better in most of the cases, if not very close. So, you know, this one here against no saves is ever so slightly higher, not significantly enough in my opinion to make a difference. This is more or less the same. The 5+ is higher for Kurnoth Hunters, the 4+ is higher, the 3+ is higher, and the 2+ is higher. So they're actually against a non-chaos target, they are better, assuming the sisters have moved. Now, looking at those figures for chaos targets, you actually see that the numbers are remarkably similar. To be honest, I would say arguably all the way up to a 6+ save. So it's only really models that have no save where there is a significant large improvement. So what we can really say is, depending on what you're firing against, Kurnoth Hunters are at least more or less as good, if not better, than a unit of Sisters of the Watch that has moved. You know, more or less. That's what I would draw a conclusion of. But clearly the Sisters are far better if they haven't moved. But when we put all of the information together, what you actually see is that the range increase of the Kurnoth Hunters, which is literally a whopping 12 inches higher than the Sisters, puts them at a significant advantage. How many extra shooting phases are you going to have before the Sisters come into range of anything? You know, if you're using them defensively, then for the first part of the game, they're not going to be in range of anything, which means, assuming they don't want to move, you can just creep up a unit of Hunters and you can start peppering away at these Sisters with them being able to do absolutely nothing. Now, the range I think is a very, very significant issue. What was the range of the Sisters? It is only 18 inches. What I think that is going to force you to do with the Sisters is you are going to have to move them to try and get them into their effective range. On top of that, you have the fact that Kurnoth Hunters have the 5 extra wounds, but on top of that, they've got a much better defense. Like, you have a 4+ re-rolling versus a 5+ save. Chances are you're going to put them in a Wildwood and cast a Mystic Shield on them, which gives you a 2+ re-rolling save with 15 wounds versus their 10 on just a standard 5-up. Now, big difference there. You've also got the fact that Kurnoth Hunters synergize very well with the Tree Lord Ancient. As I said, you know, they can spread that command ability to give your army basically an army-wide re-rolling ones for saves. They're safe from Wildwoods, which is another huge plus. They can cause mortal wounds if they're in combat. Just basically having any kind of ability to deliver mortal wounds is very important, especially, for example, if you're fighting units of Eternal Guard and they're on a 2-up re-rolling all failed saves as well. They have the Sylvaneth keyword, so they benefit from spells and abilities. You know, you've got, is it Regrowth, I believe it's called, that does D6 healing against a Sylvaneth target, so that's brilliant. I guess this here is a consideration depending on whether you're going to take Kurnoth Hunters in a Wanderer's army or Sisters into a Sylvaneth army, but you do have the fact that an advantage with Sisters is that they can be battle line in a Wanderer Allegiance army with a Waywatch General, so that might be an important consideration for you. Of course, Sisters can dish out far more damage when stationary, but they're vulnerable to the movement restriction and the lack of range, and the fact they have much less wounds. But basically my conclusion for the Sisters of the Watch is that they are very much a glass cannon. Now, get them in range under good conditions and they're gonna absolutely annihilate stuff. There's no question about it. However, the range is so much shorter than a unit of Kurnoth Hunters that, say for example, the Kurnoth Hunters decided to fire at the Sisters. Bearing in mind the Sisters wouldn't even be able to fire back, looking at what you have here, you would be looking at a 5-up save, which would cause, on average, 3.8, which is basically 4 damage. Now, immediately, you've wiped out 4 models of their 10, which is only 1 model away from being half of the entire unit. And that's just from 1 round of shooting. And all of a sudden, the unit that was highly dangerous is now almost at half its strength. and they can do nothing to retaliate to that. It starts to put things in a very, very different light. I'm going to draw my conclusion and say, of course, that I think the Kurnoth Hunter is better. And I'm really, really happy that I've come to this conclusion, because at first I was looking at these numbers here, and this here was making me think Kurnoth Hunters are not even that good. But now I don't think that at all. I think if I had the choice, because of all of the advantages I've listed, I would say Kurnoth Hunters have the edge. I would say they're a more viable option to take. I would say they're more competitive, because basically it boils down to the very same thing we had with the Dryads and the Eternal Guard. And that is basically the fact that because Sisters are situational, whereas Kurnoth Hunters have just these general abilities that are good regardless, you will find that the situations where Hunters are at their best is far more frequent than the situations where the Sisters will be at their best. I just think that makes Kurnoth Hunters a far more includable option, shall we say, that you will more immediately gravitate towards the Hunters. By all means, test these units out. That's fully what I intend to do. I think it also depends on your playstyle and what you are intending to do with your armies and what your strategies are. Even though I personally prefer Kurnoth Hunters, that may not be the case for you, and naturally I would be very interested to hear what you guys think about which one of these two units is better. But that's basically my opinion. I did also very briefly do some maths on some Skyfires and a plagueclaw, just to like have a little feel for how Kurnoth Hunters stack up against other units in the game, and I guess I kind of picked these fairly randomly, probably because Skyfires are these awesome ranged units that Chaos actually have access to, and I guess the plagueclaw, where I like Skaven, it's a very standard sort of piece of artillery, and Skyfires are actually 20 points cheaper, and this little box down here basically is our box from the Hunters slide. I've just put it very small. I can read it, you may not be able to, but for me this is literally just here so I can quickly compare these numbers on the fly. Basically, these guys, they only have one attack, they hit on 4s, wound on 3s, -1 rend, and D3 damage. So if you put a 2 on the attacks value there, you would more or less be looking at the exact same profile for a Skyfire Greatbow as you are for a Kurnoth Hunter Greatbow. However, you have 6 inches less range. But they compensate for that for having an enormous movement range, and that basically gives you this crazy 40-inch threat radius, and they're highly mobile, and they also have these really, really good abilities which I haven't factored into my maths. The first is basically that if you roll a hit roll of a 6 or more, you skip the wounding and the saves and go straight to just a D3 damage roll, which is absolutely brilliant. Like, that's great. And obviously you have a 1 in 6 chance of doing that. You don't have 6 Skyfires and they only shoot once. You have 3. That means you basically have a 50% chance of one of those 3 hits after you've made all of them having been a 6. It's quite good odds, and obviously being D3 damage, there's a chance that you will just almost auto-inflict 2 damage for the average of a D3 roll. That's pretty cool. But if you actually take away that ability for a second and compare their damage to what you're going to be doing with the Kurnoth Hunters, and on average you are going to be doing a lot more damage with the Hunters. And obviously they have this 30-inch range with their 5-inch movement, and that puts them at 35 inches threat radius compared to the 40. So personally, I would go with the Hunters again. That's just me. And this ability here, it says you can reroll failed hit and wound rolls, but that is in the combat phase, so that doesn't affect our shooting ability here at all. What we do have affecting our shooting ability is If there is a shaman within 9 inches, you can add 1 to hit rolls. So what I basically did here is I did the maths, and because like I said here, you're only making 1 shot and you have a 50% chance of hitting, which is not very good, times that by the 3 and factor in the leader's bonus to hit, you're only making 1.7 hits for your entire unit, which is not that great. Add a shaman in and you're now making a consistent 2 shots on average. But the shaman obviously costs 160 points. So by that point you're throwing the comparison off by the fact you're looking at effectively 360 points against the Kurnoth Hunters 220. Now, what that does also do, a huge benefit here, is because you're adding 1 to hit rolls, it doesn't just mean that you are hitting on 3s and 2s. It means that you are actually also potentially doing their judgment from afar on a 5 instead of 6, which is very, very cool. But other than that, their damage values are still lower than the Kurnoth Hunters. But obviously my maths here is not taking into account the ability of the fact that you're inflicting 2 mortal wounds on average for every roll of a 5 or more. So that does make them very, very good. And again, I'm not very experienced with Tzeentch at all, so you guys will have to tell me more about these units and whether you think they're as good as Kurnoth Hunters or not. But without a shaman, personally, I would prefer to go for the Kurnoth Hunters. That being said, just their chance of inflicting these mortal wounds is a very, very, very good ability. Like, anything that lets you inflict mortal wounds is very good and gives you an advantage. So in that sense, it does make them more tempting, but you're not going to be hitting very often. And, you know, if you're only making 1.7 hits, you know, you're not going to be making... your chance of passing the wound roll is going to be very low. You know, if you look here, they are all, apart from on a 6+ save removed by rend, everything here is below 1. And I guess you times that by the 2 of the D3 damage. The fact that these are all below 2 is a bad sign. So that's just my opinion for what it's worth. The other thing is, I said I would look at the plagueclaw just very quickly. It's only 180 points, but it hits on 3s, wounds on 3s. And when you actually do the maths, because you're only making 1 shot, and you basically have to roll 1 dice and get a 3, then you have to roll a dice again to try and get a 3, and then you've got to do the save roll. You're actually already on less than a 50% chance of passing its wound roll against units of 10 or less. You have the trade-off of having -2 rend, which is brilliant, and obviously D6 damage gives you an average of 3.5 wounds, so that's brilliant, but you've got less than a 50% chance of actually getting to even passing the wound roll, let alone the saves. So not ideal. And I've done the maths here for the against a unit of 10 or less, based on the very low wound roll chance. Your actual damage numbers are very, very low. It's kind of a case of, if you do hit, you will probably do some very, very, very good damage, but because the chances of you hitting and passing the wound roll are low, the damage becomes significantly less on average. Now compare these numbers to the hunters over here, and basically this is just far, far more reliable. Obviously they do have this ability where if you're firing at a unit of 10 models or more, you have just over a 50% chance of passing the wound roll, and in that case you are ever so slightly more likely to hit and pass the wound roll than you are to fail that, which does start to make things look very different, and then it doubles your damage to 2d6, and the average of 2d6 is 7. So all of a sudden everything's looking crazy, it's looking more exciting, but I didn't do the maths for that. I could, but to be honest, it's a situational thing again, and my conclusion overall would still be that Kurnoth Hunters are better. So yeah, basically that is my kind of comparison of mostly the Kurnoth Hunters with the Sisters of the Watch, but then I kind of threw the skyfires in and the artillery just to, you know, throw something else in there. That's another thing. I think the plagueclaw actually fires a maximum of 31 inches, which is only 1 inch difference from the Kurnoth Hunters, so they really are like some crazy artillery trees. I love the Kurnoth Hunters. I'm going to keep using them. I think they're brilliant. I'm not too phased by the increase in points cost. It doesn't really affect my list. If you've seen my Sylvaneth video, you know, my list is on there. I don't think it really affects it too much that they've gone up slightly in price. And yeah, I guess that's it pretty much for me for this video. I am planning on doing a separate video, as I said, where I compare the melee units, and I was actually thinking of comparing them to retributors, which may sound a little bit strange, but again, they're a unit that, depending on what tactics you're using in your army, occupy a potentially similar role, costing the exact same amount of points, and wanting to get them in there and smack things with them. It kind of makes for a fairly good comparison, I'd say. People want to take the scythes and the great swords. Are they great swords or just whatever they're called, the swords? People want to take those so that they can kind of get in there and chop down hordes of enemies, and I think when you actually do the math, you'd be very surprised at how potentially the retributors, if you get them into combat, could outclass the hunters. Yep, basically that's it for this video though. Let me know if that other video is one that you're interested in seeing. I have already done the maths for it. I've already, you know, come to some conclusions on it. If that's something you want to see, you know, let me know down below. And otherwise, I will see you guys as soon as possible with the next video. Things are getting pretty hectic with me now being back at work. When I started my channel, I was on holiday, and unfortunately, all good things come to an end, and I'm now back at work, and it takes a lot of time to put these videos together. Most nights I am up till about midnight every day of the week making these videos and, you know, editing them, putting them together, finding the research for them. It's a lot of hard work, but obviously I'm not complaining in any way. I absolutely love what I'm doing, and the support I've been getting from you guys, I know I say it every video, but it's just blowing me away. I can't actually keep up with the rate that my channel is expanding. I think last time I saw, in fact, let me really quickly have a look. It was 367 subscribers. I just can't believe that there are 367 of you wonderful people out there supporting me and brightening up my day, to be honest, because I never even thought, you know, if you just said to me 2 weeks ago, hey, you're going to have over 350 subscribers, I probably would have laughed at you. And here we are, like a week and a half later, and I can't believe it. It's absolutely incredible. You know, you guys have been so supportive, encouraging. You're a great bunch of people, and it's incredible. I just want to keep making these videos. I'm loving it. I'm enjoying it. I absolutely love Age of Sigmar, and it's great to be doing something that you really love, and then you get all these people coming and supporting you for it. So, you know, I'm not going anywhere, but thank you all so much for watching, and don't forget to please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys soon in the next one.